The massive black ships appeared in Earth's sky without warning, casting shadows so large they could be seen from space. Admiral Kethver stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking down at the small blue planet below. For 3,000 years he had done this same thing to hundreds of worlds. Today would be no different. The Vorthok hegemony ruled the galaxy through fear, not through fighting. They had perfected a simple method that worked every time. First, their enormous ships would arrive and hover over a planet like dark clouds. Then came the Terror Protocol, broadcasts, so horrifying that entire civilizations would surrender rather than face what the images promised. "Begin the transmission," Admiral Kethver ordered his crew. Every screen on Earth suddenly flickered to life. Television sets in homes, computers in offices, phones in pockets, all showed the same terrible visions. Cities melted by nuclear fire. Children crying as buildings collapsed around them. Entire continents split apart like broken glass. The images were created by the hegemony's best fearmakers, designed to show exactly what would happen if a world refused to surrender. These broadcasts had broken the will of countless species. The proud Cathari had surrendered in 4 hours. The warrior Nexari had given up in less than 2. No civilization had ever lasted more than a day once they saw what the Vorthok could do to them, but the humans were different in the Seoul Defense Command Center. General Park Hyon watched the alien broadcast with calm eyes. Around him, his officers studied the terrifying images with the same attention they might give to a weather report. Colonel Kim Dae-yoon checked his watch. Major Lee So-min made notes on her tablet. Captain Yoon Ji-ho yawned. "Sir," Colonel Kim said quietly, "they're waiting for our response." General Park had fought in 3 wars before the aliens arrived. He had seen real cities burn, real children suffer, real people die in ways that were far worse than anything the aliens could imagine. Images on the screen looked like special effects from a movie compared to what he had witnessed with his own eyes. He picked up the communication device and spoke in a voice that was perfectly calm. "We've seen worse," he said. "We did worse to ourselves last week. Try us." High above Earth, Admiral Kethver's 4 eyes widened in shock. In 3,000 years of conquest, no species had ever laughed at the Terror Protocol. No civilization had ever told the mighty Vorthok hegemony to try them. "Repeat the broadcast," he ordered. Perhaps they did not understand. But the humans understood perfectly. In military bases around the world, soldiers loaded their weapons and prepared defensive positions. In cities, civilians watched the alien ships with curiosity rather than fear. In schools, children pointed at the sky and asked their teachers why the spaceships looked so scary. The second broadcast showed even worse images. Planets cracking in half, entire species being wiped out. Horrors that had made the bravest alien warriors weep with terror. General Park's response was even shorter this time. "Is that supposed to scare us? My grandmother survived worse than that?" Admiral Kethver began to feel something he had never experienced before: confusion. Psychological profiles his scientists had created suggested that humans should be among the most fearful species in the galaxy. They were supposed to be emotional, easily frightened, quick to panic, as the broadcast should have sent them into total chaos. Instead, human news channels were making jokes about the alien ships. Social media was full of memes comparing the Vorthok broadcasts to human horror movies. Someone had already started selling t-shirts with the slogan, "We've seen worse." Perhaps, suggested Commander Zathera, we should try a different approach. But Admiral Kethver was committed to the Terror Protocol. It had worked for 3 millennia. It would work now. The third broadcast was the most terrible yet. Showed the complete destruction of Earth itself, the planet broken into pieces floating in space. It was the ultimate threat: surrender or die. In Seoul, General Park watched the images of his world being destroyed. He thought about his daughter, who was studying to be a doctor. He thought about his wife, who grew flowers in their small garden. He thought about all the people depending on him to keep them safe. Then he thought about what humans had done to each other throughout history, the wars they had fought, the cities they had destroyed, the suffering they had caused and survived. Compared to what humans had already lived through, the alien threats seemed almost gentle. "Admiral," he said into the communication device, "let me explain something to you. We are a species that invented nuclear weapons and then pointed them at ourselves for 50 years just to see who would blink first. We have fought wars so terrible that we wrote songs about them. We have survived ice ages, plagues, disasters, and each other. Your little light show doesn't impress us." He paused, then added with a smile that the aliens couldn't see but could somehow hear in his voice, "If you want to rule us, you'll have to come down here and take us, and I promise you, that won't be as easy as showing us scary pictures." For the first time in 3,000 years, the Terror Protocol had failed completely. The first Vorthok shuttles landed at sunrise in a valley between two mountains, where humans had placed warning signs in 17 different languages. The aliens chose this spot because their computers said it would be easy to control. They did not know that humans had been fighting in this exact valley for 70 years. Lieutenant Choi Min-hyuk watched through his binoculars as the alien ships touched down. Behind him, 30 soldiers waited in holes they had dug during the night. These were not special forces or elite troops. They were regular army soldiers who had been guarding the border between North and South Korea. They knew how to wait, how to hide, and how to kill. The Vorthok warriors who stepped out of the shuttles were tall and graceful, like dancers made of metal and bone. Their armor was beautiful, covered in symbols that glowed with soft light. Their weapons hummed with energy that made the air shimmer around them. They moved with the confidence of beings who had never lost a battle. But they had never fought a battle either. Sergeant Kong Yuna had been a soldier for 15 years. She had watched these same mountains through all seasons, in rain and snow and burning summer heat. She knew every rock, every tree, every place where a person could hide or take cover. When she saw the aliens walking across the open ground like they were on parade, she almost felt sorry for them. "They have no idea what they're doing," she whispered to Private Han Dong-soo, who was so young he still called his mother every week. The Vorthok had studied human military history, but they had misunderstood what they learned. They thought human weapons were primitive because they used bullets instead of energy beams. They thought human tactics were simple because they did not use complex technology. They had never considered that humans might be dangerous because they were willing to die. Private Han Dong-soo was scared, but he was more angry than scared. The aliens had threatened his family, his friends, everyone he had ever cared about. The first alien patrol came close enough to see his face. He did not hesitate. He pulled the pin from a grenade, counted to 3, and jumped out of his hiding place. The explosion killed 3 Vorthok warriors and damaged their walking machine. Private Han died too, but his sacrifice told the other humans exactly where to aim their weapons. Lieutenant Choi gave the signal, and 30 rifles opened fire at once. The beautiful alien armor cracked under the bullets. The graceful warriors fell down and did not get up. The energy weapons that had looked so frightening became useless pieces of metal in dead hands. In 10 minutes, the first alien landing was over. The humans had lost 3 soldiers. The Vorthok had lost everyone. Colonel Osangwa arrived with more troops to study what was left. She was an intelligence officer who spoke 4 languages and had a degree in engineering. She looked at the alien weapons, the alien armor, the alien technology, and she began to understand something important. "Oh, there. Not warriors," she told Major Bae Yoonji. "Look at this armor. It's designed to look scary, not to protect anyone. These weapons are made for executing prisoners, not for fighting enemies. They've been playing dress-up for so long they forgot how to be soldiers. Yeah, the aliens had conquered the galaxy through fear, but fear only worked when people believed you. We're strong." Once the humans saw that Vorthok warriors could be killed by ordinary bullets, the aliens stopped being terrifying and became just another enemy to defeat. News of the victory spread quickly. General Park Hye-in received reports from other landing sites around the world. The story was the same everywhere. Alien forces landed expecting to find frightened civilians waiting to surrender. Instead, they found soldiers, police officers, hunters, and ordinary people with guns who were not impressed by fancy armor and light shows. In New York, a group of construction workers destroyed an alien patrol using nothing but concrete and steel pipes. In London, football fans armed with crowbars and broken bottles surrounded an alien landing craft and forced the crew to surrender. In Tokyo, an elderly man who had survived the atomic bombs threw rocks at alien soldiers until they retreated. The humans were not stronger than the aliens. They were not smarter or better equipped. But they had one advantage that the Vorthok had forgotten during their 3,000 years of easy victories. They knew how to fight when fighting was the only choice left. Admiral Kethver watched from orbit as his ground forces were destroyed or captured. His commander sent reports that made no sense. How could primitive humans defeat advanced alien technology? How could soldiers with simple weapons win against warriors with energy guns? Answer was simple, but the admiral could not accept it. The Vorthok had spent so long being feared that they had stopped being fearsome, had become rulers, administrators, bureaucrats with weapons. They had forgotten that conquest meant war, and war meant that people died. The humans had never forgotten that lesson. They remembered it every day, in every conflict, in every fight for survival. When the aliens came to Earth expecting to find easy victims, they found instead a species that had been preparing for this war for its entire history. The battle for Earth had begun, and the aliens were already losing. Captain Nam Jahoon floated in the darkness between stars, watching the alien supply ship drift slowly through space. The massive vessel was longer than 3 football fields, painted black with silver symbols that meant nothing to humans but everything to the creatures. Inside, it carried food, weapons, and ammunition for the Vorthok fleet that hung over Earth like a collection of dark moons. The ship also carried something else: fear. The aliens inside had never imagined that anyone would dare attack them in the safety of space. For 3,000 years, the Vorthok had owned the darkness between worlds. No enemy had ever followed them there. Captain Nam had been a Special Forces soldier before the invasion. Now he was something new, humanity's first space warrior. He wore a simple pressure suit held together with tape and hope. His weapons were explosives made from cleaning supplies and kitchen timers. His spacecraft was a cargo pod launched from Earth using technology older than his grandfather. "Razor Team, check in," he whispered into his radio. "Corporal Lee Jasu?" "Ready," came the first reply. She was floating near the ship's engine section, carrying enough explosives to crack the hull in half. "Specialist Park Sun-ho in position," said the second voice. He was already cutting through metal plating with a torch made from spare parts. Private Kim Houn, standing by, reported the youngest member of the team. She was barely 20 years old, but she had volunteered for this mission because her little brother was still on Earth. The Vorthok supply ship had no guards, no defensive weapons, no security systems worth mentioning. Why would it need them? No primitive species had ever developed space travel advanced enough to threaten the mighty hegemony. The ship's crew consisted of logistics officers and cargo handlers who had never seen combat. Captain Nam activated his cutting torch and began burning through the hull. Metal was strong, but not impossible to break. Human miners had been cutting through harder materials for centuries. It took him 20 minutes to make a hole big enough for a person to crawl through inside the ship. The artificial gravity was lighter than Earth normal. Captain Nam drifted through corridors designed for creatures taller and thinner than humans. The walls were covered with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Psychological warfare turned into interior decoration. The Vorthok had spent so much time learning to frighten others that they had forgotten how to feel safe themselves. "Split up," Captain Nam ordered. "Make them afraid to turn any corner." This was the part of the plan that made sense only to humans. The Vorthok had ruled through terror for thousands of years, but they had never experienced terror themselves. They were like people who had spent their lives scaring children, but had never been alone in the dark. Specialist Park found the ship's communication system and plugged in a device that looked like a radio held together with wire and prayer. Suddenly, every speaker on the ship began playing sounds from human history, recordings of battles, air raid sirens, the screams of soldiers in foxholes. It's the roar of artillery that could be heard from miles away. The effect on the alien crew was immediate and devastating. These were beings who had spent their entire lives surrounded by the tools of psychological warfare, but had never been targets of it. When they heard the sounds of human conflict, they experienced something their species had not felt for generations: genuine, bone-deep terror. Corporal Lee found a group of aliens huddled in what looked like a cafeteria. They were tall, thin creatures with too many joints in their arms and legs. Their eyes were large and black, designed to see in the darkness of space. When she appeared in the doorway, wearing her makeshift armor and carrying weapons that looked like they had been built in a garage, they made sounds like crying children. "Please," one of them said in broken English. "We surrender. We surrender." She had not even threatened them yet. Private Kim discovered something interesting in the ship's computer system. The Vorthok military had detailed psychological profiles of every species they had conquered, but their information about humans was completely wrong. They thought humans were weak because they killed each other in wars. They did not understand that this made humans dangerous, not vulnerable. "Captain," she reported over the radio, "they think we're afraid of death." "Show them different, Captain." Nam replied. By the time the human boarding party had taken control of the ship, word was spreading through the Vorthok fleet. The impossible had happened. Primitive humans had captured one of their vessels. But worse than the capture was how they had done it. The humans had not used superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They had used fear as a weapon, turning the Vorthok's own methods against them. Admiral Kethver received a communication from the captured supply ship. On his viewing screen appeared the face of Captain Nam, sitting in the ship's command chair like he owned it. Behind him, Vorthok crew members worked at their stations under human supervision. "Admiral," Captain Nam said politely, "we have a gift for you." The transmission that followed was not propaganda or threats. It was documentary footage from human wars, real battles, real suffering, real people doing terrible things to each other, not because they were forced to, but because they were. Believed it was necessary. The footage showed humans fighting in conditions that would have killed most alien species, surviving disasters that should have ended their civilization, and inflicting casualties on each other that made Vorthok psychological warfare look like children's games. Several alien officers on the Admiral's bridge collapsed when they saw what humans considered normal warfare. The rest watched in horrified silence as they realized they had not been fighting warriors, they had been fighting something much worse. They had been fighting a species that had learned to be terrifying by being terrified of each other. Lieutenant Colonel Shin Wubin stood on the bridge of what had once been the Vorthok warship Terror's Edge. Now it was called Bizong's Revenge, and human engineers had painted a tiger on its side in bright orange and black. The ship still looked alien with its strange curves and dark metal. But it flew under Earth's flag and carried weapons that the Vorthok had never imagined. 6 months had passed since the first alien landing on Earth. Now the war had spread to 17 star systems. And everywhere the humans went, they brought the same message. The monsters could be killed. "Commander Chen, what's our next target?" he asked the woman standing beside him at the navigation console. "Commander." Chen Mingkong had been a ship captain before the invasion. Now she was something new, a human who could fly alien starships better than the aliens who built them. She pointed to a star map that showed the hegemony's territory like a cancer spreading across the galaxy. "The Cathari system," she said. 5 planets, 40 million bird people who have been slaves for 200 years. Intelligence says they still remember how to fight, but they're afraid to try. The liberation of hegemony worlds had become humanity's specialty, but it was not easy work. The Vorthok had ruled for so long that most species had forgotten what freedom looked like. They lived in fear, worked in factories that made weapons for their masters, and believed that resistance was impossible. But humans were good teachers. Staff. Sergeant Lim Juan was one of the first soldiers to land on Kethri Prime. The planet looked like Earth might have looked millions of years ago, covered in forests and mountains, where bird-like creatures had once built cities in the trees. Now those cities were factories, and the Cathari worked 16 hours a day making ammunition for Vorthok weapons. The first Cathari he met was named Zephyr, a young female with bright blue feathers and eyes like gold coins. She was hiding in the ruins of what had once been a school, too afraid to come out, even when the humans called to her in her own language. "The Vorthok will punish us," she whispered. They will show us the fear images again. They will take our children. Sergeant! Lim sat down in the rubble and took off his helmet so she could see his face. He was a young man from a fishing village who had learned to fight because he had no choice. Let me tell you a secret, he said quietly. The Vorthok are afraid too. They're afraid of you, afraid of me, afraid of everyone they've been bullying. For thousands of years? Want to know how I know? He pulled out a small device that looked like a phone, but was actually a weapon. It was made from parts of a Vorthok fear projector, but human engineers had changed it completely. Instead of showing terrifying images, it showed the truth. Watch, he said, and activated the device. The hologram that appeared showed footage. From the battle for Earth, Vorthok warriors running away from human soldiers. Alien ships retreating from human fighters. Admiral Kethfer himself looking confused and frightened as his empire began to fall. Apart, Zephyr stared at the images with growing amazement. They... They can be hurt, Sergeant? Lim corrected. And I'm going to teach you how. Within a week, the Cathari rebellion had begun. It was not a war between armies, but something quieter and more dangerous. A network of ordinary people who had decided they were tired of being afraid. Factory workers sabotaged the machines they operated. Pilots crashed transport ships. Guards opened prison doors and walked away. Corporal Ancion worked with a group of Cathari, engineers to turn their own factories against their masters. The bird people were naturally clever with machinery, and once they understood that the weapons they made could be used against the Vorthok, they became very creative. This is a mining drill, explained an old Cathari named Talon, showing her a machine the size of a bus. We use it to dig tunnels. What if we pointed it at the Vorthok garrison instead of the ground? Corporal Ann asked with a smile. The revolution lasted exactly 6 days. The Vorthok garrison on Cathari Prime had been there for 2 centuries, but they had never faced an actual revolt. They were administrators, not soldiers. When 40 million bird people decided to stop being slaves, the handful of alien overseers could do nothing but send messages asking for help. Help that would never come, because humans were liberating Vorthok worlds faster than the hegemony could defend them. Private Moon Taiyang was part of the team that captured the planetary governor, a Vorthok noble named High Overseer Vextel, who had ruled Cathari Prime for 50 years. They found him hiding in his palace, surrounded by fear projectors and psychological weapons that no longer worked. You cannot do this, the alien said, his voice shaking. We are the hegemony. We have ruled for 3,000 years. Well, Private Moon replied, checking the alien's hands for weapons. That was before you met us. The pattern repeated across dozens of worlds. Humans did not come as conquerors, but as teachers, showing enslaved species that their masters were not gods, but bullies who had forgotten how to fight real wars. The Nexari learned to turn their industrial machines into weapons. The Thalani discovered that their knowledge of chemistry could make explosives. The Zirak Collective found that their hive mind coordination made them perfect guerrilla fighters. Major Yi Hunhua, commanding the liberation of the Outer Rim territories, sent a simple report back to Earth. The hegemony is not a military power. It's a protection racket that forgot how to protect itself. Every world we free makes the next one easier, but the real victory was not military. It was in the eyes of beings like Zephyr who had learned that freedom was not something you asked for, but something you took. The galaxy was remembering how to fight back, and the humans had shown them the way. The ancient homeworld of Sikthera had never seen enemy ships in its purple skies. For 10,000 years, it had been the heart of the Vorthok hegemony, a planet of black towers and silver spires, where the alien rulers lived in luxury built on the fear of a billion worlds. Now human ships hung above those towers like storm clouds. The towers themselves were burning. Admiral Park. Hai Yan had been promoted after his father died defending Earth's moon base. He was younger than most admirals, but he had learned war, the way his people had always learned it, by watching their elders fight and die. Now he stood on the bridge of the captured dreadnought Sol's Victory. Looking down at the planet that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, Admiral reported Commander Zhou Xiong, the planetary defense grid is down. All major cities are asking for surrender terms. Around Earth's flagship, flew hundreds of other vessels captured Vorthok ships, painted with the flags of free worlds. Human warships built from scrapped alien technology, and even a few alien vessels whose crews had switched sides when they realized the hegemony was losing. The fleet represented something that had never existed before. A voluntary alliance of species who chose to fight together rather than bow to fear. In the ruins of Sicthora's capital city, Admiral Kethra walked through streets that had once been filled with his people's glory. The black towers were broken now, their psychological broadcasts silenced forever. The fear projectors that had maintained order for centuries lay shattered on the ground like broken toys. He was alone except for a small communications device. Through it came the voice of the human admiral, whose species had destroyed everything the Vorthok had built. "Admiral Kethfer," the human voice said, calm and respectful. "I challenge you to single combat. Winner takes the planet, loser accepts defeat." These are human terms, but I think you understand them now. Single combat was not a Vorthok tradition. The hegemony had always fought through proxies, through fear, through anything except direct confrontation. But Kethfer had learned much about humans in the past year. He had studied their history, their culture, their strange code of honor. That made them stronger instead of weaker. "I accept," he said. They met in what had once been the hegemony's Hall of Conquest, a massive room where the surrender documents of 1,000 species had been signed. The walls were covered with trophies taken from defeated worlds, weapons, flags, crowns, anything. That represented resistance that had been crushed. Admiral Park entered wearing simple combat gear and carrying weapons that looked primitive compared to Vorthok technology. He was a small man by alien standards, young enough to be Kethfer's grandchild. But he moved with the confidence of someone who had never learned to be afraid. "Your species has destroyed the natural order," Kethfer said, activating his energy. Blade. The weapon hummed with power that could cut through starship armor. "For 3,000 years, we brought peace to the galaxy through strength." Admiral Park drew a simple combat knife, the kind that human soldiers had carried for centuries. It was sharp steel and nothing more. "You brought silence," he corrected. "Peace is something different. Peace is when people choose not to fight, because they have something better to do. What you had was a graveyard." The fight was not what either of them expected. Kethfer was taller, stronger, armed with superior technology, but he had never fought someone who fought back with everything they had. Human combat was not elegant or graceful. It was desperate, brutal, and effective. Admiral Park did not try to match the aliens' reach or power. Instead, he did what humans had always done when facing stronger enemies. He adapted. The human was already moving, already striking, already turning the alien's strength against him. The duel lasted 3 minutes. When it was over, Admiral Kethfer lay dying on the floor of his ancestors' greatest monument, and Admiral Park knelt beside him with the respect that one warrior shows another. "Why?" Kethfer whispered. "Why did you not simply destroy us?" "You had the power?" Park thought about the question seriously. "'Cause destruction is easy," he said finally. "Building something better is hard. We didn't come to replace your empire with ours. We came to make sure no one would ever need an empire again." Formal surrender took place 3 days later. Representatives from every liberated world gathered on Earth, not because humans demanded it, but because they chose to come. Document they signed was different from any treaty in galactic history. Instead of terms of conquest, it established the Terran Coalition, a voluntary alliance based on mutual defense and shared values. President Lee Gunyuk spoke to the assembled delegates in words that were broadcast across the galaxy. "We did not fight this war to become your rulers. We fought it to make sure you could rule yourselves. The coalition will defend any member who asks for help, but we will never tell you how to live your lives. That choice belongs to you." Colonel Park Seojin, now serving as military governor of the former hegemony worlds, watched the ceremony from Sicthera. Around him, alien civilians were already beginning to rebuild their cities, not as monuments to fear, but as homes for free people, in a park where a Vorthok monument had once stood. Children from a dozen different species played together while their parents talked about the future. Human soldiers stood guard nearby, but they were no longer needed as conquerors. Had become something better, protectors of a peace that people had chosen for themselves. The galaxy had learned its final lesson. The best wars were the ones that ended with former enemies becoming friends.